Well, welcome, folks. I have a brief, quick announcement. My book, I Walk with the Living God, Kevin Sorbo, who played Hercules,
yes, he's a good friend,
has done an audio version, and I just got a copy of it.
Isn't that great?
He read the
So
whole
this is
thing.
Out now.
Yeah.
Wow.
Just came out. It's just 2 of these. So it's something, it's moving along pretty nicely.
That's wonderful. I mean, that is a work, because the book is a big book, and it's full of
reading, and he's got a wonderful voice, and he loves the Lord, and I'm just real thrilled.
That's awesome.
So that's along with the audio, which is doing quite well. I'm in the ratings, so I'm very pleased.
Put it in your car and drive
Sit there
somewhere.
and just, with Kevin's voice soothing you down the road.
That's great.
Well, anarchy in America. Protests have rocked Portland, Oregon for more than 50 days. Rioters in the streets have set buildings on fire, attacked police, and beaten people. Now federal agents have stepped in to help. And so why is the mayor demanding they leave? He claims they're causing the problem. The height of hypocrisy and foolishness. Dale Hurd has more.
Nearly 2 straight months of rioting in Portland. But judging from his comments to the media, Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler's chief concern is not the destruction of his city, but the presence of federal officers in Portland trying to stop the chaos. Portland police declared a riot Saturday night after hundreds of demonstrators broke into the Portland Police Association building and set it on fire.
Every city, every town.
Protesters were chanting, "Every city, every town, burn the precincts to the ground." But with increasing violence and damage now in the millions, what Portland's mayor wants is for federal law enforcement officers who are in the city to protect federal property to go away. He's accusing them of violating protesters' civil rights.
Leave. Your presence here isn't wanted. It's not needed. Unmarked vehicles, driving into crowds, pulling people off the streets without any probable cause, as far as I can tell. And the people who are engaging in those activities aren't even willing to identify who they are, and they don't wear insignia on their uniforms. That's a real threat to democracy.
In a tweet, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi called the federal officers stormtroopers. But on Fox News Sunday, President Trump defended federal involvement.
If you look at what's gone on in Portland, those are anarchists, and we've taken a very tough stand. If we didn't take a stand in Portland, we've arrested many of these leaders. If we didn't take that stand, right now you would have a problem like, they were going to lose Portland.
There were also continuing violent protests in Seattle and Chicago, where Black Lives Matter protesters pelted police with projectiles. Former 60s radical David Horowitz accuses Democratic leaders of helping what he calls terrorists.
Why is half the country torn up? Because Democrats are aiding and abetting terrorists. What else can you call these people in the streets destroying everything, beating up people? They're terrorists, and the Democrat Party is in bed with them.
And the head of Portland's police union accuses city leaders of condoning the chaos.
This is no longer about George Floyd. This is no longer about racial equity. This is about violence, rioting, destruction.
But incredibly, Oregon's Attorney General is seeking a court order to stop federal agents from arresting rioters in Portland. And 3 House Democratic chairs are calling for an investigation of federal involvement. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Thanks, Dale. I've been reading a biography of President Grant. It's a fascinating biography, Ulysses Grant. When he was president, he was facing riots in the South, and he actually had Phil Sheridan take a whole division of American troops down there. And when they did it, he was dealing with the Ku Klux Klan. He got that place in order with a whole division of federal troops under a skilled general. I don't know at what point something like this is possible, but something's got to be done, and this is outrageous. But the left is so hypocritical, and we saw something of interesting. It was in the New York Post about the founding families of the New York Times and their ties to the Confederacy. The Ox family came from down in the South and moved up to New York. They had the Chattanooga Times. Then they started and bought the New York Times. Well, columnist Michael Goodwin writes that Bertha Levy Ox mother of the Times patriarch Adolf Hott, supported the South and slavery. He also cites evidence that uncle she lived with before the Civil War owned at least 5 slaves, and he writes about compelling evidence that a brother of a Revolutionary War era ancestor of the Sulzberger branch of the family was involved in the slave trade. They actually had advertisements out advertising along with their merchandising that they had certain numbers of slaves, and they described them. Now, these are the people, ladies and gentlemen, who want to take down the statue of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson because they were, quote, slave owners. They also have this idea of 1619 as the beginning of America. America didn't believe it would begin in 1620. It didn't believe it would begin in 1607, according to this account. It only began when black people were brought in as slaves, and that suddenly started America as an oppressive regime. The hypocrisy of the New York Times, think of that. They were actually, their family was buying and selling slaves. Shouldn't the New York Times get its act together before it starts pointing the finger at somebody else? What do they say about Caesar's wife? Is not supposed to be above reproach? I mean, it's unbelievable, Terry.
Well, you almost don't know where to go with what's happening in the country today. You know, it's so against everything that we studied and knew about the country and were raised with. And you can't watch what's happening in Portland without recognizing that there is another force behind that.
Oh, absolutely.
That is...
Well, Antifa is a radical group that started, they were against the Nazis in Germany. Now they're against everything. They're just total anarchists. And they want to destroy everything. And of course, Black Lives Matter, we pointed out the founders, 3 women, 2 of whom were, they bragged about the fact they were trained as Marxist revolutionaries. This isn't just a peaceful protest any longer. And what's being done, there's a young student group that is going in, and they just love to tear stuff down. I mean, it's just kids going wild.
But you see some of these young people, some of them, not all of them, but walk down the street and hit a 80-some-year-old woman in the face and just keep going.
Yeah,
I mean,
knock them down.
What's wrong with?
Well, there's a spirit of violence, and you know it's demonic. But how do we stop it? Well, something's got to be done, and I don't know what all the laws are that give the president a certain amount of power, but he certainly has power to protect the federal installations. And the mayor of Portland is off his rocker, and Nancy Pelosi to say that these are stormtroopers, and you know, it's unbelievable. We must support the police, and it's going to take Donald Trump, believe me, it's going to win the White House for him, because the American people are sick of this violence that's going on in Seattle and Portland, and they're all over the country. Well, there's a song about baby, it's cold outside. Well, it's not cold outside, it's hot. I mean, it's powerful hot. July is now the worst month on record for the coronavirus cases, with no sign of slowing down. And we're going to talk about a heat wave, but we've got a wave of infection as well. John Jessup has more.
That is right, Pat. More than 140,000 Americans now have died from the coronavirus, and new cases are nearing 70,000 a day. And as Pat was just saying, July now has the highest number of new cases of any month, more than 1 million. In Texas, mobile morgues are set up outside overflowing hospitals. It's one of 8 states setting new records in coronavirus deaths. In the past 7 days, 21 states have hit record number of cases. On Fox News Sunday, the president defended his administration's response.
I take responsibility always for everything because it's ultimately my job, too. Now we have somewhat of a surge in certain areas, and other areas we're doing great. But we have a surge in certain areas.
On the positive side, Dr. Francis Collins told CBN News he believes we'll see a vaccine by the end of the year.
I am cautiously optimistic that by the end of 2020, let's say around about December, 1 or more of the several vaccines that are now going through rigorous testing will have been shown to be safe and effective and will be available for the public, although probably we will not immediately have 300 million doses. It'll take a little while to scale that up, but we'll have a lot at that point. So prayers and hopes and all kinds of good thoughts would be appreciated, because this is all hands on deck, flat out. We got to make this work.
For more on the coronavirus, let's go back to Pat.
Well, CBN medical reporter Laurie Johnson is joining us now. Laurie, what is the status of these virus chasers? These, well, do we have a vaccine? Do we have anything to stop this coronavirus?
Well, as a matter of fact, Dr. Collins was alluding to the fact that it looks very promising that we are going to have at least one vaccine, perhaps more than one vaccine, that is safe and effective by the end of the year, and that can be distributed to the neediest of people. We're talking about people who live in nursing homes, healthcare workers, and the like, and perhaps the entire country, Pat, can have a vaccine if they want it by spring. But before a vaccine is available, we are the number of therapeutics, the drugs and the treatments are really ramping up, and many of them are in their final stages of testing, and those look very promising as well.
Talk about little children. What is the status? Little infants, are they immune from this thing?
Well, we know that we have seen some positive cases in infants, and that's very disturbing, of course. We never want to see children get sick, but happily that we aren't seeing any deaths in infants and very few, almost zero deaths in very young children, which sort of plays into the narrative about here we are in the middle of July and the beginning of school is coming. The kids have been out of school since March. What do we do about school openings? And so individual school districts all over the country are wrestling with this, because we see that the caseload and the death rate, certainly for children, especially very young children, is almost zero. But then, of course, we have to consider the teachers and the maybe older relatives the children go home to at night. So it's a very complicated situation. But we do know that the death rate and the infection rate among children is very low, lower than we typically see every year of deaths among children for pneumonia and the flu.
Well, do they bring this stuff home? Is that the worry? They themselves don't catch it, but they're carriers?
Well, it's actually, at first, it was more of a concern than it is now, because the evidence is bearing out that children actually are less likely to get the virus and not the super spreaders that some other age groups tend to be. So it looks like children are, for some reason, a little bit more protected from getting it and spreading it than originally thought. They're not completely immune, but their risk is lower than originally thought. And it does vary from age to age. And of course, we always have to be very mindful in any age group of these, what we call comorbidities, these underlying conditions. So you have children who have some serious issues with maybe asthma or some other autoimmune diseases. They are at higher risk than the general population.
The president has been widely criticized because he may have been telling a joke, but it has to do with testing and the death rate. What about testing? Do we have enough tests? Are we getting the word back fast enough from the laboratories?
Well, most health experts will say that the testing has grown exponentially, and more testing is better, and there's never really enough, and so we definitely want more testing. But as far as the death rate, that's a very different equation. So when we hear about cases, we're talking about people who have tested positive, and that's very high. But we also need to look at the death rate. In fact, many health professionals say the death rate is even more important, and right now the death rate in the United States is 3.8%. That means that of all the people who test positive for COVID-19, 3.8% of them die. But again, that's a little misleading, because it makes it seem like everybody's risk is 3.8%. As I just pointed out, children have practically 0% death rate, but people over 80, their death rate is more like 10%. So the older you are and the more comorbidities you have, the greater your chance of dying from this. One of the most concerning comorbidities is obesity. type 2 diabetes. We know that the United States has an extremely high rate of obesity and type 2 diabetes compared to the rest of the world. So when you talk about our death rate, most experts will say that that can more likely be blamed on comorbidities in the United States than who's occupying the White House.
Very, very cogent. Thank you so much, Laurie.
My pleasure.
Laurie, it always brings us a fresh perspective.
Well, I think we're all ears for anything new that's coming up.
Well, we've got to, you know, somebody said, what's the secret of your long life? Well, one of the things is I'm an expert on nutrition, and I eat very, very carefully, and I think it's so important. I mean, that you feed your body the right stuff, that you take the right kind of supplements, and you keep your weight down. And, you know, but anyhow, we're not going to get this stuff if we do get it, we can overcome it. You know.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really good news to know that our children are not as vulnerable. It seems that what Laurie was talking about with the comorbidity, you know, that's an across-the-board thing, no matter what age you are. And so, you know, rather than walking in fear, as a lot of people are, you know, let's see this as an incentive to do the things that you're talking about, to look at what are we eating, what is our exercise.
Doctor talked about the metabolic syndrome, and the metabolic syndrome has to do with this overweight and the other things that is wrong. But let's face it, God is on the throne. He is in charge, and let's trust in Him, and you will not fear for the terror that is walking at night or wasting at noonday. 1,000 will fall at your side, but it will not come nigh you. That's what the Bible says. Read it, 91st Psalm. John?
Pat, congressional Republicans hash out the details of the next round of economic aid at a White House meeting with President Trump today. House Democrats have already passed a $3 trillion spending bill. The GOP expected to release a $1 trillion plan this week. One big issue, the $600 boost to weekly unemployment checks set to expire this week. Democrats want to extend it, but Republicans likely will propose a cut. President Trump wants a liability shield so businesses can't be sued if people contract the virus. He's also insisting on a payroll tax cut.
What about the payroll tax cut?
I want to see it. I want to see it.
And if it isn't in the bill?
I'll have to see. But, yeah, I would consider not signing it if we don't have a payroll tax cut.
One point of contention, congressional Republicans have proposed billions more in spending for testing and for the CDC and National Institutes of Health. The president reportedly is against it. A pastor was attacked and a police chief injured in Northern Virginia over the weekend during a Saturday Bible study at Grace Covenant Church in Chantilly. The Fairfax County Police Chief, Ed Rossler, and another church member came to the pastor's defense after the suspect stabbed the pastor who was leading the group. He and another church member were taken to the hospital with minor injuries. Another pastor at the church said in a statement, "We are in prayer for all the injured. We are grateful for the courage exhibited that prevented worse from happening." Well, today, parts of the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast will have their hottest day of the summer so far. Temperatures will rise well into the 90s, and some places could top 100 degrees. Add in the humidity, and it could feel as hot as 115 in some areas. Meteorologists encourage everyone to stay indoors if possible, saying if you have to go out, drink plenty of water and avoid strenuous labor or exercise in the late morning, afternoon, or early evening hours. Some good advice there. Pat?
It's breaking records, folks. It is a heat wave of massive proportion. And our temperature here is usually pretty benign, but it was like 103 yesterday.
It was crazy.
I think the heat index is a lot higher than that. So, and you look at Phoenix, it's just off the charts.
Yeah. And it's so easy. You know, you don't realize you're dehydrating until you have an issue. So you really need to keep up on the water intake.
Well, I know. I was out in Arizona in my jogging days, and I was out jogging, and I didn't understand. I didn't have any sweat. And I thought, well, you know, this is strange. I should be sweating because I'm out there running. And then I realized that it was so hot that the perspiration was
drying right off.
Drying immediately, and I was close to heat prostration and didn't even realize it. So play it safe, but it is powerful hot. And I think it's going to be breaking records from what I understand. Many cities especially on the East Coast, you're looking at triple digits in places that they don't normally have them that way. And stay inside. Okay.